Most unlikely of villains, smooths of brain and for pause. Does it talk? Does it know how? Does it boggle? Does it meow? In the lair of the cerebral bore, and will show him so much more. We'll leave your brains at the
Welcome back to Rebroadcast. I'm your host, Jason of the Nerds RPG Variety Cast. Today I am rebroadcasting an old episode of Down in the Heap. That's Rob C's podcast. Mostly it's an OSR podcast, but he talks about other things. And he and I did a series on the Universal Monster movies. So if you missed them the first time around, I'm replaying them. I'm hoping this hits some new ears, maybe send some people to listen to Rob. But if nothing else, if there are other monster kids out there, hopefully this will be of interest to you. If you listen to this over on Rob's show when it was originally published, there's nothing new, nothing added, so, I'll be back next week with a bonus episode where we have the next reading from Conan the Undaunted, where the listeners get to call in and tell me what to choose when we hit those decision points. So, I hope you enjoyed today's show, and I hope you join me next week for the next part of Conan's adventure.
In old school games, life is cheap. Don't be a dope. Bring your pole, oil, and rope. And try not to go down in a heap.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Down in a Heap podcast. I'm your host Rob, podcasting to you live from beautiful Transylvania? No, it's northeast Minneapolis. Today, we're going to do a little step back into time when I and Jason from Nerds RPG Variety Cast had a little conversation about the Universal Monster movies. We both share a love of those movies and had talked about doing kind of a deep dive into the movies themselves. We were going to look at each franchise separately in its own episode and bat those back and forth between releases on our own podcasts. And this first one went much longer than we intended. And the thought was we were going to maybe do another take on it and try and trim it back and have a little more structured approach. But it's been a while, and we had a little conversation, just said, let's release it. I don't know, we think it's pretty interesting, or not bad at least, I don't know. Hopefully you'll find it worthwhile and interesting, especially if you're fans of the movies like we are. And our hope is to do maybe some spin-off episodes too, where we look at other influences in TV and other movies and games too, and just how influential these movies have been in popular culture. But without further ado, let's take a look at Dracula.
Listen to them, children of the night. What music they make.
Hey, I'm joined here by Jason Connerly from Nerds RPG Variety Cast, and like me, he's a big fan of the Universal Monster movies. Dracula, Frankenstein, all the classics. So we've been kind of talking back and forth about doing a little bit of a deep dive into the Universal Monsters, and we're thinking that we'd probably do it by franchise in order of the release. So first up is welcome to Transylvania. It's Dracula. And welcome to the show, Jason.
Thank you. I appreciate your letting me come on. Really looking forward to this.
Yeah, I love the Universal Monster movies. I grew up watching, I think there was a show, I don't know if it was like a Midwest regional show or not, but it was called Horror Incorporated. And it was I think on Saturday nights, appropriately enough, but it just had like old monster movies, Godzilla movies, and stuff like that, and that's where I first got my exposure to these old movies, watching them with my brother and sister, and I don't know, they've always kind of captivated me. There's obviously a big dollop of nostalgia, but I think they're, really influential movies, especially for their time, really well done, iconic actors and directors and set pieces. And the monsters you have developed some empathy for a lot of these creatures. They're not just, homicidal maniacs for the most part.
Right. This current franchise excluded a little to some degree.
Right. Right. They're kind of murderers by definition. But one of them in one of the films definitely kind of wants to get out of it.
Right. Yeah, we'll come to that. Yeah.
Yeah, but the biggie, of course, is the original, the Dracula, Bela Lugosi, and is it Tom Browning? I can't remember the guy's name.
Todd T.O.D. Browning, 1931.
Yeah. Yeah. Was the director. He also famously did Freaks, and I think he directed some of the Lon Chaney silent movies too and stuff. So like Hunchback of Notre Dame, maybe,
I would have to look. He had a successful
Phantom of the Opera. Yeah,
he had a successful silent career, and he did a good transition into the talkies, but then Freaks killed his career.
Yeah,
unfortunately.
Yep. So this is obviously, a take on the Bram Stoker novel, the same name, but it was, I think, due to budget constraints, they followed what was the theatrical performance, kind of more of a set piece kind of study. They do start out in Transylvania, obviously, but it's obviously not the book. In part because it's all these movies for the most part are pretty brief. They're not real long movies, and in some ways that can be a strength. You can tell the story pretty quickly and stuff, but in others, it maybe could have used an extra 20 minutes or something in some of the movies, I think. But for the most part, I enjoy the fact that you can watch the entire Dracula franchise in an afternoon, and whereas some of these TV series that have a lot of padding and stuff, you can spend a whole week binging them and maybe not even get the same amount of bang for your buck, entertainment value.
Right. And when we discuss the Spanish Dracula, which I guess that's just what we'll refer to. I'm sure people know, but when they filmed Dracula in 1931, Universal decided they wanted to hit the Spanish language market as well. So during the day, the film that everybody knows, they filmed that. And at night, they had a different set of actors and crew come on using the same sets and filmed a Spanish language version. And we'll talk about that. But that version's about an hour and a half. It does have that extra bit. So we'll get to that. But
yeah. So, like the book, it starts out in Transylvania with, a carriage rolling onto the scene carrying Renfield, this
he's a lawyer. He's a real estate lawyer.
Yeah,
right?
A real estate lawyer. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And he's making this transaction on behalf of Dracula to purchase or rent or whatever Carfax Abbey in Whitby, England. And Renfield, played by Dwight Fry, I think one of the better performances in my mind in the movie, or memorable at least. We'll find Dwight Fry again in Frankenstein, but he plays a pretty sober and a little, not foolhardy man to begin with, and you see flashes of his sanity in his ravings later on, but for the most part, he becomes a raving lunatic. And but they roll into the village, and there's one of the things I like about this production of Dracula is you do have, starting at the top with Bela Lugosi, you have an accent that goes with what you think of Dracula sounding like. And I'm sure it's kind of a chicken egg thing. We think of that voice for Dracula because of Bela Lugosi, but it fits with the book. And then the peasants that you run into are the villagers. Also, can't remember the actor, but the Russian born actor that plays the innkeeper or whatever, that kind of seems to be the spokesman for the villagers or whatever. But they're all, of course, completely freaked out by the fact that Renfield's going to visit Count Dracula at night of all things, and going to Castle Dracula and trying to dissuade him from going. But I don't know, what did you think about, I mean, movies from the 30s, especially early 30s like this, there's a lot of, I think, over the top actor gesturing and things like that. Like this is kind of a transition period from silent to talkies, and you definitely see that in this movie, where you have long stretches without much sound, let alone dialogue, and it kind of works sometimes to create kind of an ominous feeling or a feeling of dread or something. In other places, especially when it is dialogue going on, some of the dialogue kind of seems a little clunky and stuff, but I don't know.
Yeah, it's definitely in that period, that transition period, and you could tell, a lot of these actors had been silent movie actors, and this is maybe again a reference to Spanish version, more obvious in that, and the lack of a soundtrack's more obvious in that, and then maybe a little bit of the overacting, or not overacting, but the more expressive acting is a little more obvious in that one. I like in the English version, I like the lack of soundtrack, to be honest. I think it I think it works really well. With the Spanish one, I felt the lack of a soundtrack. I think it could have benefited from the soundtrack. I like the use of matte paintings, which was standard through all these kind of things, but I thought the matte paintings were really well done. So we're not quite to Castle Dracula yet, but because of code reasons and this and that, they end up using armadillos in the castle instead of like rats running around, right? Which is kind of neat. I thought it was well done. The villagers had a good look, and I think this English, one of the things that makes the English version a little more stand out than the Spanish is the fact that, and maybe it's different for like I'm not fluent in Spanish, so I can't really pick it up, but like you mentioned, the accents. So Dracula and the villagers have accents, where in the Spanish version, I don't think they're doing that. I think everybody's just kind of speaking, just kind of like a flat.
Right. I don't have an ear for Spanish at all either, but it doesn't sound like there's a big variance in the way people, like you'd hear a regional dialect. Not to me, but I'm sure someone that actually is a native Spanish speaker would say otherwise, or might say otherwise. But
right. So so that's definitely a strength here. I think the acting is fine. The Renfield does a good job, like you mentioned. Dwight Frye does a good job there, and we'll come on to. Personally, I think there's probably 4 standout actors in this movie, and we'll come to Edward Van Sloan later. And I do think Helen Chandler does a good job at Mina, especially at certain points.
I do too. Agreed.
So, but I think that those 4 probably are the standouts. So I think it's good that we start with Dwight Frye and of course Bela Lugosi. The other thing that's with this one that I really like is it goes in this first part where he gets Castle Dracula and he cuts his finger. That's the only blood you see in this entire movie is when he cuts his finger at the dinner table.
Yep, and the only blood drinking you see is done by Dwight Frye when he sucks at the little wound that he has. And of course Dracula, when he sees that, is there's a close up of Lugosi's eyes. This kind of feral kind of look that he gets and stuff, which is a little chilling and stuff. And I'm sure to someone in 1931, it was really pretty chilling to see something like that. But I mean, like, this movie by today's standards it's not very scary or anything, right? I mean, I don't think many people, maybe if it's a small kid or something, might be kind of scared by it or something, but there's no like jump scares or any of those things. There's not, like you mentioned, like gore or anything or really any hints of torture or anything like that. I mean, it's just kind of and that's how all these Universal movies are for the most part. It's just kind of this, you can feel a sense of horror at the things that happen. And you can empathize a little bit with some of the monsters, and the victims, but it's not like, real scary, to me at least.
Right.
But so Fry gets taken to Borgo Pass to meet Castle Dracula, or to meet Count Dracula. Before that, we see him and his brides emerging from their coffins. And even that, a lot of this stuff is left to your imagination, whether it's Dracula closing on a victim and then they break away, or you see a hand wriggling out of the coffin, like almost like they're looking for a latch, or they're just kind of coming out of a stupor or something. Yeah, and then you usually just see except you see the one woman sitting up, one of the brides sitting up in the coffin. But Lugosi, you never actually see get in and out of the coffin. You just hear this thump, basically, of like the lid of the coffin falling shut, and he's standing behind it. But in the Spanish version, there's always like a fog or a mist, and then Dracula appears behind the coffin. Is that Carlos Villar? Is that the name of the actor that portrayed?
Yeah, actually, that's exactly what I was going to point out. Was him emerging from the coffin the way he does. Yeah, it's Carlos. I guess that's how you say it. It's Villarias. And his Dracula is. We're so used to Bela Lugosi. I think he does a pretty excellent job as well. And in fact, one of the things that Carlos does, I think, better than Bela Lugosi does, is he shows his disdain for all the regular people. There's a lot of scenes in the Spanish Dracula where he'll meet somebody, or somebody will interrupt him in speech or something like that, and you'll see this look of utter disdain on his face. And then he puts it away, he smiles, and he tries to be nice to him, or to enchant him again. But that utter disdain for humanity, you can see in his face. And I think he does a really good job. We'll come to later on. There's at least one scene that's much better with Bela Lugosi. But for the most part, I think they both do a really excellent job.
Yeah, they both have their strengths. And I noticed, I picked up on that too, that in the Spanish version, that kind of disdain and for all things that associated with the living too. Like when in the Spanish version, the meal that Count Dracula lays out for Renfield is done much more in depth in the Spanish version, where Renfield's actually eating and stuff. And when he's cutting off a piece of bread, that's when he nicks his finger. And but Carlos Villar, or whatever however you pronounce his name, the Spanish Dracula actor, almost seems repulsed by Renfield eating and stuff. Just he looks down on it and just has this kind of look of disgust, like Renfield passed wind or something. But
right. So two really quick other notes for the Spanish version that aren't in the English version that I think are much superior and help with the mood are, before they get to the dinner, they get to Castle Dracula. Of course, Dracula makes his appearance at the top of the stairs, like in the English version. And there's this huge cobweb behind him. And he bids Renfield to follow him up the stairs. And all of a sudden, Dracula is on the other side of the cobweb, and Renfield has to cut his way through the cobweb with his cane. Which I thought was a really effective scene, where Dracula kind of went through the cobweb, untouched. And the other thing in the Spanish, where the doors in Castle Dracula opened on their own, like he would turn towards the door and it would open for him with a creaking sound, which Renfield, it scared so I guess real quickly, we'll just get out of the way. The actor that played Renfield in the Spanish version was Pablo Ivaris Rubio, and he did a great job, a little more over the top, but he really was maybe the standout actor in the Spanish one.
I agree. Yeah,
But,
he was more of a kind of a screaming, like horrified or terrified performance, whereas Renfield was just more like, crazy town. Or not Renfield, Dwight Fry was
Right.
more.
Yeah.
And I thought Dwight Fry did a better job of I don't know, the look that he'd get, his eyes and stuff bugging out, and he just seemed a little bit more hysterical or something at times, and just more like he was more into the idea of helping out Dracula at times, and what the power that he might gain from helping Dracula.
Right. They give Rubio more screen time too, and he has a couple really good scenes with the act. Well, let's do the actors real quick. That way I don't have to go back and forth.
Sure.
Van Helsing is Eduardo. I'm butchering these names, but Arizemena. I don't know, but this Spanish actor played Van Helsing. Some of these actors are actually Argentinian, and anyway, the actor that plays Van Helsing in the Spanish version does a really good job, and he has a couple scenes with Renfield that are really good. And so there's that. But yeah, no, I think Dwight Fry did a great job. But I really like that scene with the cobweb in the Spanish one. I like the doors, and I guess the other big difference, although I'm jumping ahead a little bit here. I'll wait.
Go ahead.
Well, just when Renfield's converted into a thrall in the English one, he ends up Dracula leaves the room after they look over the documents for the paperwork for the estate that he gets in England, and then Renfield opens the window and the bat flies in, and basically Dracula turns him into a thrall, bat form in the English one, but in the Spanish one he lets his brides, the vampire brides, get Renfield, which I thought was really neat.
And in the Browning version, the English version, it's Lugosi that then he actually, like, his brides close in on Renfield, and Lugosi shoos them away. It's his kill or whatever, his victim. So he stoops over, and again, I mean, you just see him making the Lugosi claw-like gestures, which I don't know. Do you think that came from Nosferatu? I mean, the Murnau, the initial or one of the first vampire Dracula movies, the silent version. I mean, because in that you've got the was it Max Schreck, the actor that plays Dracula, is much more hideous like the book, but he has these really long taloned claws and stuff, so it's really pronounced when you see it. And it almost seems like Lugosi is really trying to capture that imagery with his hand gestures and stuff.
It's either that, or as you mentioned, and we'll talk about this Frankenstein too, but these theatrical, theater productions, stage productions that that people saw and wanted to convert to the screen. So without seeing the stage productions, it's hard to say,
right?
Because it may be off these stage productions too, but it's definitely. But that's a direction that was given to both actors, because Carlos as Dracula does the same kind of thing with his hands. Not as well. Lugosi has long fingers, longer fingers than I think average. So Lugosi, I think, is a little more effective with with his hands, and his hands are a little creepier. But they both kind of do that same kind of thing.
And if I'm remembering correctly, both Lugosi and Edward Van Sloan were part of the theatrical touring performance of Dracula. They came from that background. So Lugosi had played Dracula on the stage, and Van Sloan had played Van Helsing on stage. So they both had this character kind of down, at least without the film director changing maybe some of that outlook or that idea behind the character.
Yeah, so I'm looking here, and this is a adaptation of the Broadway, as we've said. I don't see anywhere here on. Now, I don't want to burn a lot of time doing this, but I don't see a date for the Broadway play just here on the Wikipedia page.
Mhm.
So I don't know.
Yeah, my guess is
The
it was
time
in
frame.
late 20s, early 30s. I don't know.
Right.
I mean, this was 31, so but
so probably mid 20, and Nosferatu was 22.
yeah,
So, and it's probably all, kind
right.
of
And
muddles together.
just having like claw-like hands seems kind of natural for like a predatory monster like a vampire or something.
Right.
So we're in Castle Dracula, and Renfield is finally succumbs to whether it's Dracula in one version or his brides in the other, and then we are whisked away to England via a ship that
The Vesta.
the Vesta, and in the English version, it's primarily outtakes from a silent picture, and just a couple scenes with where you see like a close-up of Lugosi, or you see Renfield talking to Lugosi in the coffin. But in the Spanish version, there's a lot more going on. That's new material. I wonder why because as you mentioned, they filmed concurrently. Just one crew is at night, and one crew is during the day. I'm wondering what was behind the reasoning there for the English version not to really do more with that.
Yeah, I don't know, and that's an interesting question. So I guess the other thing we should mention is the director of the Spanish version is George Melfield, Melford, Melford, and he was actually an American. Well, I'm sure some of these actors are American too, but he was a New Yorker, and so he wasn't. They got
English was his first language,
right? Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, they got one of the company men to direct. The Spanish version. So it's interesting. No doubt they shared a lot of things. They had to have shared scripts and things like that.
Yeah.
Here it is. The stage play was 24. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, so it was 24. But yeah.
In fact, you see Lugosi in the Spanish version and some of the long shots that were just outtakes from the English version that they used in the Spanish version. I mean, had I not been told in the commentary or something that was Lugosi, I might, unless I would still framed it or something, I probably wouldn't have been able to tell. But they did, borrow from the English the English version, and but in the Sea Voyage, that's when most of Dracula's killing is done in the film, because he feeds on the entire crew basically. And aside from that, Dracula's not a very effective vampire.
So in the English version, once he gets to London, he does take the one. I guess she's a streetwalker or whatever.
Yeah, a flower girl or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, flower girl. That's right. Yeah, and then of course we have Lucy. But yeah, that's about it. And then Lucy's doing killing later.
Yeah.
Where in the Spanish one, I don't know that we see. We see a couple of
the crew on the Vesta,
and then Lucina, the Lucy character. I think is the next one that he kills.
Yeah, because you don't see there's not the flower girl scene in the Spanish version where Dracula just basically kills her on the street.
So I guess we should say, so Dracula kills the crew. The ship gets to England anyway. Renfield is whisked away to Dr. Seward's mental asylum.
Sanatorium.
Yep. And but Dracula had brought his three boxes, which includes casket and his earth from Transylvania. So one thing, the other thing, I guess, to mention with the Spanish version, we didn't mention this, but even earlier on in the film, there's more exposition, and they're telling you more about the lore. They go out of their way, like in the carriage, to tell you, oh, these are vampires, and they drink blood, and they do this, and
Yep.
Yeah, they do that more in the Spanish version.
Yep.
English.
And in both versions, Dracula is introduced to the rest of the characters at like a opera house where they're where the main characters, Dr. Seward, his daughter Mina, who's named Eva in the Spanish version. I don't know if Mina and Eva, I don't think they're like an equivalency, but whatever. And then Jonathan Harker and Mina's friend Lucy. And in both versions, they have like a little bit of a inner exchange. For some reason, he's in both versions. He like hypnotizes an usher, or I don't know if she's like a coat check girl or what, but some servant that works at the opera house to tell Dr. Seward that he has a phone call. And I'm not really sure. Did you get an impression of why Dracula did that? I mean, did he want to just have alone time with the young ladies, or?
Yeah, I think he just used it as a
way to step in.
Yeah, as a way to get that introduction and just have that distraction to get introduced. I guess we should mention the Dracula, the property he rented, the name of it written down.
Carfax Abbey.
There we go. Carfax Abbey is adjacent to the sanatorium.
Yep. Which
is interesting that Renfield goes there. I don't know how planned that is, or if it's.
Yeah, maybe. It's hard to know. Maybe Dracula foresaw all this happening, that Renfield would be driven mad and would, be put in the sanitarium and stuff. So that's why he chose Carfax Abbey, because of its location. It's hard. I mean, even why Dracula goes to England is a little bit strange, but ostensibly to pursue new blood.
Right. Well, and we'll come
country.
to that. Yeah, we'll come to that when we get to Son of Dracula.
Yeah. But, so he's introduced. They have a little bit of a back and forth where Lucy, especially in the English version, has kind of a more taste for the morbid. You can tell by just the way she talks about or recount some fable or legend about, or saying, I can't remember.
Yeah,
a toast, right? That's what it is. That's what it is. And Dracula, of course, is taken by that kind of attitude, and in both says something like, "There's far worse than death awaiting man," or something. I can't remember the quote.
Yep. Yeah.
But so then they go to I don't know, the Seward home where Lucy is apparently staying, and Mina, who's played by Helen Chandler, and Lucy, I can't remember the Dade. I think her last name is Dade, but I can't remember her first name, the actress's name.
I've got it here in front of me. It's Lucy's. You're correct. Frances Dade.
Frances Dade.
Yep.
They're talking about Count Dracula, and Lucy is obviously smitten with him, and Helen Chandler does her best Bela Lugosi impersonation by talking in his kind of accent and delivery, kind of the first, attempt to do the Bela Lugosi Dracula, which I thought was pretty hilarious. And but Lucy becomes Dracula's first victim, or second victim in the English film, I guess.
Right.
But that's all glossed over. You don't really, it just goes right to like one of those observatory scenes in a hospital where there's like a gallery of presumably medical professionals all gowned up, looking down at an operating table where Dr. Seward and others are examining the body and alluding to the fact that they had been giving Lucy transfusions and stuff, but there was just too much loss of blood to save her. So this is days or maybe weeks later that she actually expires, but it's all kind of glossed over. And then after Lucy passes, then we start getting into the Dracula targeting Mina as his next victim. But then in this whole intervening time, we were introduced to Renfield's ravings and stuff.
Right. Yep. So I guess one other interesting difference, I don't think they show the bites. I don't think they show the bite marks in the English version, do they?
I don't think they ever did. And in the Spanish version, they do. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And in the Spanish version, you never even see anyone. It's usually just kind of a lunge or Dracula kind of descending on the victim or something. But in the Spanish version, you actually see like Eva actually does try and bite or bites.
Right.
Harker.
The Harker. Yeah.
Yeah.
Neither of the Harker actors were really a standout.
They're both pretty... just kind of wooden stiffs. I mean, David Manners and he plays the same. He reprises the same kind of hokey role in The Mummy too, where he's this ineffectual, smitten milquetoast, and the Spanish actor is slightly better, but I think he has less dialogue than in the English version.
Yeah, Barry Norton plays Juan Harker in the Spanish one. But neither one is very. Yeah, neither one's very good. They're no Keanu Reeves, right? That's bad when Keanu Reeves is your standout. Of course, referring to the
the Bram Stoker's Dracula,
right?
With, Gary Oldman as Dracula. Yeah,
right. Yeah.
Excuse me.
But
so
Francis Ford Coppola, that's who I brain farted, but Coppola did that, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So
one thing I forgot to mention in the, and he did say it in the famous I never drink wine is
said both. Yep.
Said in both. Yeah.
And I guess what's interesting there is, and I made a note about this, so the Spanish version has a little more humor, but both these are played pretty serious, much more serious than some of the later Universal movies are. Usually these movies have, characters put in to do humor, they have these humor breaks or this or that. And in here, in the English one especially, the only real humor is there's a scene later on with a groundskeeper and like a female, I don't know what she is, his house servant, whatever.
Martin and his, I don't know if it's his wife or whatever, but or a nurse or something that work in the sanatorium.
Right, but that's about the only, and we can talk about the scene when we get to it, but that's, I think, about the only comedy scene in the English one at all.
Yeah, he's kind of played Martin. The character of Martin is kind of a comic relief character in a way, and Dwight Fry you could maybe see as, but he's really not played for comedic effect. I don't think. No. I mean, there's an element of the absurd about his ravings about flies and spiders and all that, but I think it's meant to be more distasteful and dreadful than humorous, really. Although Martin seems to be, and the other patients in the sanatorium seem to be pretty amused by Renfield's, eating flies and all that. So
sure, yeah, but even that line, I never drink wine, is dead straight. It's deadpan. Yep. It's not, where later vampire movies, of course, that's going to turn into a hammy. It'll turn into a character. But
so Van Helsing comes on the scene when he's the examining doctor for Lucy, right? Or he's the one that seems to notice that she has these marks in her neck. Is that when Van Helsing comes on?
Believe so. Well, the marks are noticed during the examination, during that autopsy scene. Yeah. And what's interesting here is the marks on both when you actually see them in the Spanish version, they're described almost like insect bites.
Yeah.
Well, they're not described like when we think of vampires nowadays, you think of those two front fangs, and you think of
Yeah.
you know, but that's not how they're described here at all.
Yeah.
You know, it's hard to see how even, you know, pointed vampire teeth are going to make these tiny pinpricks that they describe in these movies,
Mm-hmm.
which is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't
So-
remember if I in the Spanish one he comes on as a consultant for Renfield's case.
Yep.
Because when you first see him, he's looking at some of Renfield's blood, and he's you know, talking about, you know, how they're but
yeah, I think Van Sloan, or I think Edward Van Sloan was looking at like a vial of blood too when he's introduced and stuff. But he's the one that's kind of like seems to have some kind of supernatural lore and stuff too, that understands vampire mythology and stuff, and is the one that realizes that they're dealing with a vampire and tries to convince the other people. Now, I mean, so the powers that Dracula seems to possess, the one that's used the most effectively is this hypnotic kind of power that they seem, that especially Lugosi, you know, with his crazy gesturing and stuff, and his eyes, that he gets that crazy look in his eyes too, seems to really pull off well. And he seems to in both versions they seem to focus most of their attention on bypassing, like getting servants to help them, or nurses and stuff to leave windows open, or to take off the wolf's bane or something to allow Dracula to come in, or but they also use it on Mina or Lucy or something, you know, or the flower girl. But then we see, and I mean, I think to me, the best scene in Dracula is the confrontation between Dracula and Van Helsing. And Van Helsing confirms his suspicions about Dracula being a vampire by noticing in a little mirrored cigarette box or something, or cigar box, that Dracula is not casting an image into the mirror. He hears and sees Dracula having a conversation with Mina and Seward, I believe, and then looks back at the mirror and doesn't see him. And then Seward leaves the frame, and then it's just Mina and Dracula speaking, and you just see Mina in the mirror. And then I think he points that out to Jonathan too, doesn't he? Or maybe
I think he does in
one of the versions, maybe. Yeah. In one of the versions, I think he sees it.
This is the scene where the English does a much, well, I'll let you finish describing it, and then.
Yeah. So then Van Helsing decides, well, I'm just going to confront Dracula with this. So he closes the box and then says to Dracula, I've just discovered the most amazing thing. You know, look here, and opens the box. And in the English version, Dracula immediately just sees his reflection and goes into like an animal rage and knocks the box out of Van Helsing's hands, and then slowly seems to regain his composure. And in the Spanish version, you see this kind of look of disdain from Dracula as he looks down slowly towards the box. And then it's like a jump scene or something to the group. And Dracula actually has a cane in his hand, and he too has kind of a look of rage on his face, but then strikes the box with his cane and breaks it out of Van Helsing's hands. And they're both, I mean, effective. I happen to like the way they pulled it off in the English version better. It seemed more like just a natural like reaction that happened. But I don't know.
I agree. No, I definitely agree. I think Lugosi is almost an instinct reflexive, snap to knock it out of his hand. I think that's better. I do think the expression, almost animalistic expression you see in the Spanish versions, again, that actor's got a pretty expressive face.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think the English version pulls that off a little bit better. But so we've seen, we have the ability to mesmerize, this hypnotic power the vampire has. We don't really, although it's talked about in other movies, but we don't really hear too much about his strength in this one. We know he can transform into a bat, which is something we saw, is something we didn't mention, but when at midnight at Borgos Pass in the beginning of the movie, Dracula's actually driving the carriage. He's actually the carriage driver, and then he turns into a bat. So there's this great scene where Renfield looks out and there's no driver for the carriage. There's only this bat floating above the horses. As they're going down the road. So that's one thing that we hear, maybe not so much in role-playing games, but we hear in mythology, and especially in later movies, is the idea that vampires have to be invited in. And we don't see that in any of these, none of these Universal movies do we see that. At least none of the four that we're talking about today.
Right.
So I don't know if that was added later or if that's just something they decided to, overlook in these or what.
Yeah. I'm not really sure. I'm trying to, it's been so long since I read the book too, that I don't remember if that's part of the book. So after in both versions, after Dracula smashes the box, he seems to then just like, all right, basically you got me. And does the you're a wise man, Van Helsing, for one who's only lived a single lifetime or something. Your wisdom is beyond the years or something like that. So he seems to basically just fess up to, yeah, you got me, Van Helsing. But he just walks away basically in both movies, right? And then, so I should have done a little outline of the movie because I'm forgetting the scene next, but I think we go to a Renfield scene, right? There's at least,
I would think. Yeah, I didn't make outlines of these either.
Yeah, there's at least one scene with Renfield where he talks about what Dracula, or like some kind of dream or something that Renfield had, where he sees this sea of rats, millions of rats, and they're all for him.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that was the other, I guess, maybe power that's alluded to here is the communication with animals, with wolves and with rats. And the idea that wolves aren't normally in England, but both these movies, you can hear wolves howling, whether that's Dracula talking to Renfield, Dracula in the form of a wolf, or is Dracula brought wolves with him.
Yeah. And I think Martin, the orderly or whatever his role is, does say that Renfield insists that when he hears the howling wolf, that's Dracula talking, or that's someone talking to him, Dracula. And the part Renfield plays on behalf of Dracula is really kind of unknown. I mean, what is he really doing? It doesn't seem like he's doing any kind of inside job as far as like letting Dracula in, but he talks about how he's begging Dr. Seward basically to send him away. And if he doesn't, he can't be held responsible for what happens to Seward's daughter, Mina, or Eva. So there seems to be this implication that Renfield is somehow part of this, plague that's beset Mina, or this, attack, more or less a series of attacks on Mina. But it's not really explicitly said what Renfield's part is.
Right. I think so. And the movie doesn't support this aside from references by Renfield at the end before he dies, Renfield talks about, he doesn't want to die with all these innocent souls on his head, the innocent deaths. And we know in both versions that the sanatorium, the security there is horrible. He just comes and goes as he wants. you know, and he's outside Dr. Seward's house all the time, and he's going where he wants to go. So I don't know if he's getting victims for Dracula, you know, off screen that this is not referred to. We do know there are other disappearances because when they do Lucy's autopsy, they you know, it's obvious she's not the first one they found like this. But, you know, we don't really hear a whole lot else about that. Now, Lucy is turned into Lady in White, and she's out killing children.
Right.
And there doesn't seem to be any, well, no, and she's not. Dracula's just left her to her own devices because she's buried in the graveyard, not with him. He hasn't even gone and pulled her in with him. So so I would say Renfield's probably, and this is just speculation, like I say, the movie doesn't support it, but he's getting other victims for Dracula maybe because
that makes some sense. I mean, it certainly plays, you know, or speaks to Renfield's guilty conscience and stuff. So escaping in the Spanish version, they do have one scene where they show the bars all twisted up and where Dracula obviously bent the bars to let him out or whatever, but you never see that in the English version. He just somehow gets away. But Dwight Fry, both of them deny like knowing Dracula, and Dwight Fry does it in this kind of almost hysterical way where it's like, Dracula, I've never heard the name, you know, as he's kind of trembling as he's pulling his hand down his chest like he's wiping away his knowledge or something. But the Spanish speaking actor does it in a really offhand way. His delivery is more like, Dracula, I've never heard of him.
Right.
And it's a really different.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, that's fine.
No, it's interesting because he kind of flits back and forth. There's one scene with the Spanish actor that I don't think it's been a little while since I've seen the English one, but I don't think the English one has, where when Van Helsing first meets Renfield, Martin brings Renfield in the office and he's sitting down, they're talking, and Renfield's, oh yes, I went to here and I got my law degree in 28, and he sees a fly on the wall, and Renfield gets up and Van Helsing says, no, stay where you're at, and so everybody's and Renfield goes and he grabs this fly, and then he looks he gives this he looks at them and has this embarrassed look, he just lets it go, I thought that was a really good scene.
Yeah, that's there. It would be so cool if they had followed the same script more closely to see the performances more mirrored in one another, to see how they change, but they're so different in little subtle ways that it's hard to compare in that regard. I mean, it's easier to compare in that, there's this scene in this movie and not in the other, but but it would be interesting to have seen what like Dwight Fry would have done with that, or what or they also talk more about Lucy, I think, and like killing her in the Spanish version.
Right.
But
yeah, they both do. We'll do outlines next time, folks. But
right.
Yeah, but no, go ahead.
Oh no, we'll try and I'll try and take better notes and stuff. I think I've probably seen this movie like at least a dozen times. I think I'd have a better grasp of it.
Well, so Dracula comes back, and Lucy's getting weaker and she's having these issues, but Dracula comes back into the house to confront. What's interesting so he comes back to confront Van Helsing.
Yep.
And
he's the troublemaker standing in the way of all his plans.
Yeah, and in both versions, Dracula tries to hypnotize Van Helsing.
Yeah,
and
now that you have learned what you have learned, right. as Lugosi is walking into the drawing room or whatever to confront Van Helsing, right. And Van Helsing just kind of stands there, and he doesn't seem to be frightened at all of him. But then, and he basically just tells Dracula, I'm going to get rid of you or whatever, but then Lugosi does the come here, and he gestures, trying to use the power of his will. And I think this is where Van Sloan's acting really shines, is this, without any dialogue, just this internal struggle. You see him his eyes trying to resist or whatever, and then feeling like he's falling under Dracula's sway, and he takes a couple hesitant steps towards Dracula, but then rallies, makes his saving throw, and kind of shakes it off, and then steps back. And then Lugosi, having failed in that, makes a lunge towards him, and Van Sloan basically just casually pulls out a crucifix from his pocket, and there's no ostentatious display of I don't know, he just holds it there right at his hip, and Dracula pulls the cape back over his face and turns and runs away. Classic turn undead kind of thing.
Right.
But I thought it was really, and I don't, if I'm remembering right, in the Spanish version, there's not any big display of that either. I think it's done fairly understated.
Yeah, he does. So in the Spanish version, the difference is it's the same kind of thing where Van Helsing tries to resist Dracula's power, and he's reaching for the cross, and Dracula in the Spanish one specifically says, "You cannot move your hand without my permission," or whatever.
That's right.
Then he tells him to take whatever you were going to get and put in that box there.
Yeah.
And he pulls the cape over his face because he doesn't want to see the cross.
Right.
And Van Helsing is again made his saving throw, so he opens the box, shuts the box, but he has the cross held up in front of him. Yep. And so when Dracula lowers the cape, then the cross is in his face.
Yep, that's right. That's
which
great.
I thought was good. I thought it was pretty well. Both versions are well done. I mean, they're yeah. And the other big difference is, so in the scene that immediately follows the English version, this confrontation between Van Helsing and Dracula, is Mina trying to seduce and take Jonathan Harker as her victim. And I'm joined here by another commentator, Herman, who is a big Bela Lugosi fan. So you might hear some cat noises here. Yeah,
hopefully I won't turn my drink over.
No worries.
But in the Spanish version, they have those two scenes meshed together. So you see a snippet of the Van Helsing Dracula confrontation, and then it goes to the Mina Harker confrontation and back and forth, whereas in the English version it's two separate scenes.
Right. And this scene here is maybe maybe not the only one, but this is a standout scene for Helen Chandler as Mina.
Yes.
Because she gives the look she gives Harker on the balcony before she is about to attack him.
Yeah.
It's just this haunting look. It's well done. It's so well done.
Very kind of feral. Her eyes almost seem to glow a little bit or something. There's some kind of real weird effect that she has with her eyes there. That's very good.
Yeah. The other one doesn't. So in the Spanish version, I think we mentioned, but Lupta Tovor plays Eva, and I mean, she does fine, but I don't think she pulls it off as well as Helen does.
Right.
Yeah.
And the other big difference between the two female leads, the wardrobe is much more revealing and stuff in the Spanish version. In the English production, even when Helen Chandler, Mina's getting out of bed, it seems like she's in some kind of evening gown or something, ready to go out to the opera again. Whereas Lupita Tovar playing Eva is, wearing very revealing negligee or whatever, especially for the 30s.
Right.
And I don't know if was the code the same in the two language, because I think there were actual rats in the Spanish version too, weren't there? Or maybe it was.
No, I think it was still an armadillo.
Possum and armadillos.
Or possum or whatever. Yeah, it was because there at the beginning when we first see Dracula come out of his coffin in the Spanish one, there's a possum or whatever it is. But it comes through a cobweb, and there's a couple of things. But I don't think there are any. They talk about the rats again, just like they do. The rats promise a Renfield. The other thing this might be in the English one, but I don't remember it. But and I just watched the Spanish one, so that's why this is fresh in my mind. But there's a talk later on with with Eva, and she described seeing seeing Lucy, the lady in white, and how she it was her, and but then her face turned terrible and wolf like a like a wolf, and then she ran off in the nights. But the idea of her face changing and turning kind of horrific, I don't know if that was, especially we get in later movies like your 80s movies and then TV shows, vampires often have a human face and a monster face, right?
Right.
You see this in, Fright Night. We see it in the Lost Boys. Yeah. And I want, and obviously we don't see this
performance in the Coppola version,
right? And while we don't physically see it, the description there kind of almost sounds something like that, which I thought was interesting.
Yep. One thing in all these Universal Dracula movies, all the vampires move at like slow motion. I mean, they don't, aside from like Dracula knocking the box out of Van Helsing's hands, all their movement is very slow and deliberate as they're going upstairs or coming out of the coffin or taking a victim. It's all really just this slow menace kind of thing. So I think that's kind of funny, especially when they're just like climbing stairs and almost like zombies or something.
Right. And we can talk about when we hit the other monsters, aside from the creature, and the Invisible Man, right? Well, no, I guess the Wolfman Frankenstein moves slow, but I guess the Wolfman doesn't. Yeah.
And the creature lurches around too. I mean, underwater he's fast, but like on land, even has the arms outstretched like the Frankenstein monster or a zombie or something.
Yeah, so that's maybe just a thing of the times, the whole building the tension of it that's slowly approaching. Like the Mummy, you definitely have that, right?
Yeah. So then, anyway. I mean, the scene, they finally have the big confrontation. Dracula abducts Mina, intending to take her back to Carfax Abbey to, I don't know, complete the transformation or whatever. But at this time, Mina is basically the thrall of Dracula. And in both cases, they run into Renfield. In the English version, he comes in as they're descending a long staircase. Well, that happens in both, I guess.
Yeah, happens.
Anyway, and Dwight Fry's Renfield begs for his life, like you alluded to, doesn't want to die with the blood of all these innocents on his hands, and Dracula basically throttles him and then throws him aside like a rag doll. So that's the one instance where you really kind of see that maybe he does have some kind of superhuman strength or something. Then Parker and Van Helsing are hot on the heels. It seems like they've maybe just taken care of Lucy or something. I don't know. But they're intent on destroying Dracula. And here Dracula's actually moves a little bit more quickly as Lugosi is carrying Mina and goes through a door, slamming it in their face. And but apparently doesn't have any latch or bar that he kind of fixed, because they pretty easily get through it. And day's breaking, so they've returned to their coffins, and they are in this big underground cellar with the big support pillars and stuff, which is, I think, a really cool set piece, just like the Castle Dracula's. The effect they get there is really cool too. But then, yeah, they discover Dracula, and there's no real confrontation. It's just, break up the top of the coffin and grab something heavy to drive the spike into him.
Right.
And,
So,
yeah,
and the movies they're about the same. So in the Spanish one interesting difference is when he throttles Renfield, he tosses him. He throws him down the stairs. He rolls down the stairs in the English. We're actually this stairwell in both these. There's no side to it. Yeah. It's open on the side, and he just throws him off the side. In the Spanish one, just hurls him off, which is a little more violent. And then I don't remember, but Mina doesn't get in the coffin in the Spanish one. She's loose. She's hiding in the basement when they kill him. Yep, and so Van Helsing lifts up the coffin and looks, and you can't see what it is, and Harker doesn't see. It almost seems like she is in there at first. Oh, in the English one, I think she is. Yeah. And he sends Jonathan off to find something heavy to drive the stake through Dracula, and then you see Mina off screen, all terrified and stuff that they're going to come for her next. But I don't think in the initial release did you hear like the death throes of Dracula. You hear like the pounding of a stake, and you hear like one groan. But in the commentary track, you heard a lot more of it. And in the Spanish version, you hear a lot more of Dracula dying. Both are off stage. You don't see the actual staking. You see the hand raise or whatever to strike the blow, but that's it. You don't see like an actual stake going through Dracula or anything. Right. In the Spanish one, we hear Lucy as well, because Lucy's like say in the separate cemetery. Yeah. And they go there and they come out and they talk about that they killed her before they go. Yeah. The one thing the English one does better is you see them breaking up that coffin lid to make a stake. Yeah. Or in the Spanish one, they just pick a piece of wood off the ground and do it, but they don't break up the coffin lid. Yeah. Which you would think if they're planning on staking him, they'd be a little better prepared with a stake and a hammer. Not find me a rock or something to drive the stake with, Right. But yeah. And then the movie just ends, at that point. Yeah. In both versions, the movie ends with Harker and Mina or Eva climbing the stairs hand in hand, like, they're going to their wedding or something. And there's even kind of like wedding bells playing in the background or something. And it just ends really abruptly like that. So in both, I thought the ending was, even though it definitely ends the story or whatever, or ends the chapter of Dracula, neither one felt real, like it was really, I don't know. There wasn't much heart pounding to it. Let's put it that way. Yeah, it wasn't an exciting finale by any means. No. So have you ever seen? I believe, I don't know if it's on the, the 75th anniversary edition I have, but so in 1998, Philip Glass, they commissioned him to do a score for the movie, and it is on some of the DVD releases. Yeah, I've never watched it with that score. I don't know if you have. I've only watched like the first maybe 10 minutes of it just to kind of get a feel for it. I haven't watched the movie all the way through with that, but yeah, that is a feature of the one I have. I have the Legacy collections that came out with the release of that Van Helsing movie. They released all the monster movie collections. Those are the versions I have. So yeah, there you have it. That's Dracula and the Spanish Dracula. And then 5 years later, 1936, they came out with Dracula's Daughter, and it picks up right where Dracula ends, which I liked a lot. And they even have Edward Van Sloan back reprising his role, but this time he's Von Helsing rather than Van Helsing. I wonder if Edward Van Sloan, he had to have noticed that, right? It makes you wonder, right? Part of his name. Yeah, this movie, they had a hard time finding somebody direct, and this was the last of the Universal horror movies, are like they're made in spurts, or not historically, but they had made them in spurts. And there was lull in making them after this one.
Yep.
This was the end of the first grouping of
The
those
first wave,
movies.
yeah.
The first
Yep.
wave. But Lambert Hillier is the one that is the director for this one, and a lot of people find Dracula's Daughter. Well, critics and supposedly modern audiences, I don't know that I believe it, but find Dracula's Daughter superior to Dracula in every way, right? And I don't agree with that. I think, there's talk about Dracula's Daughter. It's supposedly based on another chapter that Bram Stoker wrote, but it's also off of is it Carmelia or yeah, and people, oh, it's lesbian connections, this and that, which there are some tones in this, but this isn't a bad movie by any means.
No,
but it's not.
No.
To me, it's not superior to Dracula.
No, I don't. I agree. I don't think any of the actors rise to the level of the four that we counted as kind of standout performances in Dracula. I don't think any of them, even Edward Van Sloan, who's reprising his role, doesn't seem to. Well, first, he doesn't have a whole lot of lines in this movie.
Right.
I mean, he's more or less a consultant, and he's found by a couple policemen who wander onto the scene. Who knows why they've wandered into Carfax Abbey, but they find him just finishing up taking out Dracula or whatever, and book him, basically convict him of murder or something. And Edward Van Sloan is like, well, Dracula's been dead for 500 years. And but the cops are kind of played up in a little bit of a comic relief way. Even the music kind of has that whimsical twist to it that lets you know that here's the comedy coming.
Right.
And so I like that. I liked how it picked up where the original movie left off, but it's a little bit downhill from there.
Yeah, I agree. Gloria Holden does a good job as the Countess. I think. Well, I don't know. I don't know if we're gonna. Well, I'll let you go on. I don't know if we're gonna recap this one as much.
No, I don't think we need to go into the sequels quite as much.
But there are some effective scenes in here, like where she recovers Dracula's corpse.
Yeah,
Dracula's body, I think, was well done.
Yep. Yeah. So apparently the bodies of Renfield and Dracula are taken back to the police station too, and they're waiting for the two local policemen are waiting for someone from Scotland Yard or someone to come and take possession of the bodies. And while they're waiting, one of the head of the station, the sergeant, heads off to meet, the detective or whatever, leaving just the constable by himself. And then Dracula's daughter, the Countess Maria Zaleska, comes in and wanting to take Dracula's body. And she is garbed up, so she has like a veil and and her hair is covered, so all you see are her eyes. And she has this big ostentatious ring on her finger, which seems to be almost like a focus that she uses for her hypnotic power.
Right. And
it's not really clear. Did she kill that constable to take Dracula's body? Or, I mean, he just kind of
No, I don't think so. No.
He was just in a stupor.
Yeah, he was in a stupor because they talked to him later.
Okay.
I think. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I don't think she kills him, but she takes the body and then she burns it.
Yeah, she burns
in a ritual.
Yeah, hoping to almost end the curse of vampirism, because she doesn't want to be. She's kind of disgusted by her her status or whatever, and wants to see sunlight again and throw off this curse of darkness. But she's got her own little henchman,
right?
Sander, who is this? I don't know. How would you describe Sander?
Irving Pitchell plays him, and he does a pretty good job, all things considered. I think he's supposed to be. I don't know. He's
kind of like the Igor.
Yeah, he really is.
He's like a blood slave or something. I don't know. His hopes are obviously that he's the Countess has promised him eternal life, so she's going to turn him into a vampire, and it's not really stated why she hasn't yet, but it seems pretty obvious that he's her longtime companion,
Right.
or enabler, whatever, who takes care of watching over her during the day and stuff, and they always make a point of puts her cape on and puts the ring on her finger when she goes out on the prowl and stuff for victims. But while she's burning the body, he's off kind of just standing. But so part of the ritual, she has like a crude cross that she's lashed two sticks together. And when she holds it up, she looks away from it before she casts it in the fire. And at the same time, Sander looks away too, like he can't stand the sight of it either. So it's almost like some kind of transformation has begun or something. But Sander is really, really this morbid character too, because after Dracula's daughter thinks she's thrown off the curse by burning the body, she goes back to their studio, and she's playing the piano or harpsichord or something. This almost like children's nursery rhyme music, and saying how she sees birds in the twilight, and Sanders, they're bats. I hear dogs barking because they hear wolves. So he's always like the negative Nancy throwing the dark angle on it and stuff. And when she says, "What do you see in my eyes?" he says, "Death." So he brings her back, and she just goes on being a vampire. But Van Sloan, in his defense, doesn't seek to employ a solicitor or lawyer or anything. Instead, he turns to his former pupil, Jeffrey Garth, played by Otto Kruger. And he's a psychiatrist. And Van Helsing presumably is thinking his only defense is that he can convince the jury, the judge, that he's sane. So he's wanting Jeffrey Garth to prove that he's sane.
Right.
With his stories.
Yeah, Kruger doesn't impress me overly in this role. I didn't find him very impressive. Now, I liked his secretary, Margaret Churchill, who plays the secretary Janet. I really liked her performance. I thought she was good. But I didn't find the male lead, very impressive at all, to be honest.
No, he was very, I don't know, not very likable, patronizing, and he just seemed to kind of be just full of bluff, and I don't know. Yeah, I didn't think it was all that great.
Did they ever establish? So, she's the Countess, and she says she's Dracula's daughter, and we hear that there, and here and there,
right?
And she obviously, has the right to the castle, because everybody, even the local constables back in Transylvania, know that the castle's hers now, but hers, but when she died at the end, she's beautiful. Well, she was beautiful when she died 100 years ago or whatever, Van Helsing says. So, but if she's 100 years old and Dracula was 500 years
500,
old,
right?
I always took it as she was one of his like victims or brides. It was just elevated to a higher status.
Right, not his biological daughter, but his he's taken her
as protege,
as another
kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. That's how I took it more too. I mean, she does say that she's Dracula's daughter. She specifically has that line. Right. And she also uses the line that I never drink wine when they meet in a dinner party, because Dracula's daughter, the Countess, meets Jeffrey Garth at a dinner party along with his assistant Janet, and so Janet and Jeffrey Garth have this kind of adversarial, kind of back and forth relationship, which is borderline flirting, and I don't know, almost like
like
5-year-olds. Yeah. And he only realizes that he loves her obviously after she's gone. So but the Countess is struck by this Jeffrey Garth, the psychiatrist, basically saying that he can cure people's maladies. So she's thinking that, well, if this is a disease of the mind or something, that he can help me stave off these cravings for blood. So she's bent on trying to have him basically treat her for this case, and he essentially says you just have to confront it head on, and just overcome it through will, which she attempts to do by sending Sander out to get a model to paint a picture of or something. So Sander goes out into the foggy streets and runs across Lily, this this girl that's just walking around at night. So I don't know what her profession is, if she's an orphan, if she's some homeless person or a streetwalker or whatever, but she's this fresh-faced young girl that seems pretty horrified by Sander, and maybe thinks he is like propositioning her or something, but he reassures that, no, I just want you to come back to my mistress's so she can paint. She wants a model, and there'll be food and a warm fire. So she goes back, and the Countess offers, they give her food and wine, and they make a point of only saying that she's doing a study of a female form, head and shoulders. So there's no like overt like undressing scene or something, but she does take off her blouse and asks, do you obviously want the straps of my blouse underneath to be lower down. So she is in a pretty revealing situation, and there's a little bit of tension that maybe you could say is some kind of sexual tension between the Countess and Lily or something. And that, I think, is part of where people get this suggestion of this kind of lesbian kind of theme and stuff in the film, and later when with Janet as well. But she uses the ring to again like put Lily under this mesmerism or something, and they find her later, presumably Sander dumped her body somewhere,
right,
and she winds up in the hospital where Jeffrey Garth is called back to the hospital to treat her, and they pull her out of the mesmerism with his kooky light reflecting flicker machine. And she gives a halting description of, hints at where the Countess's apartment is in Chelsea. And so he has his clues, and she promptly expires from a heart attack or something, retelling the horrific tale. And that leads Jeffrey Garth hot on the heels to back to his flat where he had left the Countess, because she had come for an appointment that they had together, and Janet had stopped in on her way to a party that they were both supposed to be attending or something, and had a little confrontation with the Countess. And the Countess and Sander, when Janet came back inexplicably to the flat, maybe to like try and make up with Jeffrey or something, and go to the party together, but they whisk her away with the plan that Jeffrey will follow and fall into her clutches. Now, why the Countess doesn't just hypnotize Jeffrey, or even attempt to, because she doesn't even attempt to do it, maybe because he has this clinical learning, he's immune to the power, I don't know.
Or she wants him to join of his own free will, I think, is more the...
Yeah.
But because I think she alludes a couple times, I can make you do this or that.
Oh, okay. All right.
I think it's been a little bit, but yeah, I think she wants him to, because she makes him make that choice at the end when he chases her Transylvania, and Lucy's there, and she said, or not Lucy, Janet's there, she tells her, your life for hers, and you have to choose. So
Yeah, so Sander and the Countess take Janet all the way back to Transylvania by airplane. They both travel there by airplane. Obviously, in the 30s, you would have had to stop for gas a few times along the way, but they wind up back at Castle Dracula, and there's kind of a scene where the Countess, they have Janet stretched out on a sofa or something, and Sander is asking why she's even kept her alive and stuff, and she makes her plans known that she's going to swap Janet for Jeffrey, Jeffrey's compliance and becoming her companion or whatever. And of course, Sander is what, you're kicking me to the curb for this guy? So he's all upset about it, and he's waiting at the gate of Castle Dracula with a bow in hand to shoot Jeffrey. So you see him leaning over the battlements, and he misses with his first shot and runs away. And it looks like the Great Hall or something looks like the same shot from the original Dracula. It looked like that same kind of cobweb covered staircase.
Right.
And Jeffrey Garth even breaks through that. He's got a gun. He's got a revolver, or not a revolver, a handgun out, and he goes through the cobwebs. I don't know, Sander, was he able to get through without breaking the cobwebs, or was he? He was up above. He was above.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, he comes up to the main room or whatever, and the Countess comes out and is trying to convince him to join her. He tries to snap Janet out of it, and the Countess is saying, well, it'll be the same result basically as Lily, the model. She'll die if she's under my power. And then Sander fumbles. Or no, I think he
kills her.
Yeah, he intentionally shoots his arrow at the Countess. I don't know why he wouldn't just kill Jeffrey and have him out of the way, and then he's back to where he was, right? He could get immortal life, but he's snapped. He popped a bolt, and he shoots the Countess and nails her right in the heart, and she goes down in a heap.
Yep.
And as he's drawing the bow to fire another shot at Jeffrey, the Van Helsing and the
Scotland Yard detective is guy. Sir Basil Humphrey, played by Gilbert Emery.
Yeah, he shows up with some other policemen, and they shoot Sander before he's able to.
Yeah, actually, I think it's one of the Transylvania cops. I think actually is one that shoots because and then he puts his gun back in his hold. Yeah, we didn't mention, but we had mentioned Scotland Yard, but the Scotland Yard detective Sir Basil's played for humor too throughout this movie.
Yeah,
and he has some good lines. He's there in bed and he gets called out back to her flat in when they're back in London and Chelsea, I guess. And he's called over there, and he has a great line when he gets there about when Jeffrey mentions about vampires. He says, "What new piece of asininity is this?" Pretty great line.
And Sir Humphrey has a manservant named Hobbs.
He does. Yes, he does. Yeah, and they have a pretty good exchange.
Yeah,
when he's looking at his stamps and doing this and that. Yeah, so he's kind of. But I mean, what's good about Dracula's Daughter is they tried to do something different. It's not just a cookie cutter. It's not a sequel where they tried to retrace all the same steps. They did, unfortunately, I guess they felt like they had to insert certain things like the I never drink wine and the autopsy scene. There's an autopsy scene in this movie that's the duplicate of the one in Dracula. It's you're back in the big room and the dialogue's almost verbatim the exact same as in Dracula. But overall, I think I think doing something different was the right way to go. And this isn't a bad movie by any means, but it's not. I don't know.
No, it's not. It's not horrible. Like, I mean, there are some of the Universal sequels that are, just bad. And And this, I wouldn't say is bad. It's worth seeing. It's not something I'd watch many times or something,
Right.
and it's not something I'd rush out and see. It's not the A-list Universal monster movie, but it's definitely the B-list. It's not the D team yet.
Yeah, I agree. But speaking of that, there's one more movie in this series
Yes,
from 1943.
this time Lon Chaney dons the cape.
Yeah. Lon Chaney Jr., I guess we should.
Yeah, Lon Chaney Jr., right. Lon Chaney was actually the person that they wanted to play Dracula originally, but he unfortunately died of cancer before he could do it. So, I mean, it would have been interesting to see what Lon Chaney would have done with it. Obviously, there would have been a lot more makeup involved and stuff than what they did with Lugosi. But
right.
But yeah, Lon Chaney was the original earmarked Dracula, and here his son, fresh off the performance as the Wolfman, Larry Talbot, dons the cape, and this time he is Count Alucard.
This movie is definitely a step down.
Yes, it is definitely a step down. Dracula comes to America. He comes to the Bayou. They're definitely in the deep South, and this plantation owner, his daughters, one of his daughters has apparently been abroad and run into Count Alucard and fallen under his sway. And Alucard sees his opportunity to, again, come to the New World, I guess, for new blood. I don't know.
Well, and they specify that about how he's the old land now. It's the soil's lost its richness, and the people have lost. So it's just like dusty and sucked dry. And so now he's come to a new land, a new vigorous land, a new vibrant land, something like that. They say that twice, I think, throughout in the movie.
Yeah,
this idea.
Yep, this idea that almost like the countryside withers away, like the victims of the vampire.
Right. Right.
So yeah, they hatched this plot to basically to have Kate, is that her name? The older daughter is going to become the wife of Dracula and turned into a vampire.
Right, and she's plotting this whole time though.
Yep.
Against Alucard.
Right.
Yeah.
And this is the first time that you actually see. I mean, the movie's bad or worse. But the special effects have been ramped up a little bit here. So we've got Dracula. You see him transforming from a bat to a vampire and vice versa. You see him transforming or turning into a cloud of mist and stuff.
And we see for the first time, at least in the English versions, we talked about how Eva actually attacked Harker Juan in the Spanish Dracula, but we actually see, a victim being fed on, although it's in the shadow. We see the shadow of a bat feeding in this one on Frank in the prison cell.
Yep.
And we see I'm sorry, go ahead.
And we see the wounds too.
Right. And we see a Dracula destroyed by sunlight and actually where the hand turns into a skeletal hand. When he's destroyed by. So this actually, a lot of the tropes you'll see the later ones, including the special effects stuff we see.
Yep. And Lon Chaney is still dressed in the evening wear like Bela Lugosi. I mean, he's got an outfit basically just like Bela. And the supporting cast, I mean, there's really no standout performances in this either, as far as I'm concerned for that.
No, but we should mention Robert Page does okay as Frank Stanley, but I think the important and to be honest, Lon Chaney is kind of flat as Alucard. He's not very good.
I think Lon Chaney Jr. is pretty good without lines. He's good at acting. I mean,
he does a good Frankenstein's monster, which he gets to do.
I kind of mean that as a compliment. He's good, like as his Wolfman. He's good at assuming just his physicality and stuff. He's pretty good at stuff like that, his facial reactions and things.
Right.
But anytime he has dialogue, it's usually not so. He's better in the Wolfman than this, but
he is. But the other actor I think we should mention is Evelyn Akers, who's here is Claire Caldwell, but she's in The Wolfman as Gwen Conliffe. Is the lead, and she also, we'll talk about her down the road, but she's in Ghost of Frankenstein, Invisible Man's Revenge as well.
Okay. Yeah.
So she's in a bunch of these movies.
Yeah, you definitely see, some of the same actors throughout this Universal Monsters. But the Count Alucard thing is kind of hokey, and
when it's called out immediately,
exactly
at the very beginning, they don't.
they just step on the touchdown call right away, and it could have been interesting. It might not have, especially in 1943. Maybe people maybe wouldn't have. It hadn't maybe become such a common trope or whatever to just spell your name backwards. It maybe wouldn't have just dawned on people, but they call it out in the opening scene,
right?
Examining the luggage on the train, and the guy just starts literally spelling it backwards. Oh, D-R-A-C. Yeah, it's right there. They whisked it down their leg, and that's. I mean, the movie itself is. There's not a whole lot to sell it. I mean, it's basically a rich debutante who wants to retain or obtain eternal life. There is one twist in that she wants to kick Dracula. She wants to kick Alucard to the curb and keep her old beau Frank, and turn him into a vampire after Alucard's turned her. And she's going to keep him human and tries to convince him in the jail cell so he can move around during the day. And he's supposed to find Alucard's coffin and burn it or stake him or whatever.
Right. So
while he can move around at the daytime.
Yeah, we see that. We see here they talk about the vampire's great strength. So that's here. Because it's set in the South in America in the time frame, you have some unfortunate racial humor in there, which is not to say it was just the way movies were made back then. It's just what it is.
Yeah, there's a whiff of like Gone with the Wind kind of stuff.
So you just can't. You can't escape that, unfortunately, with in the 40s when they made. It was just in there, but it's an interesting movie. It's entertaining enough to watch once,
right?
But again, it's not one you're going to come back to a bunch.
No, like you mentioned, it's notable for Frank finds Alucard's lair in the swamp and burns his casket or his coffin, and then he eventually is out of his casket at dawn. So he disintegrates and turns into a skeleton. So I don't know if that's the first vampire movie where that. No, wait. So in Nosferatu, he definitely dies by the sunlight. I can't remember if he just disappeared or what happened in that, or if he collapsed and then they cut away into the skeleton. I can't remember. Anyway,
this is the first Universal, the first of these kind of movies where but
and then he burns Kate's coffin too. So a little bit of a twist at the end, because you wonder. I mean, I was kind of thinking there'd just be like a confrontation with Kate and they'd stake her or something, but Frank has already beaten the posse, so to speak, back to the plantation house, and he's put on a wedding ring on her finger or something, and then lights the casket on fire with her in it and kills her. So Frank redeems himself in the end, even though he's a little bit of a, I don't know, I guess a confused and desperate man, because he tries to kill Alucard after he's seemingly been spurned by Kate, and he shoots at Alucard, and the bullets go right through Lon Chaney Jr. Alucard and strike Kate. So he thinks he's killed her, and he's completely unhinged by that.
Right.
And there's this whole investigation process going on where the police are trying to convict him, and meanwhile a doctor, and there's a Hungarian doctor, like an Van Helsing-esque character named Laszlo that comes over, and and they know Alucard is truly Dracula, and
there's
Lon
a confrontation too.
Yeah, and Lon Chaney Jr. actually says he's Dracula. So is he the son of Dracula, like the daughter of Dracula, or is, I mean, that's what I assume. I mean, but yeah, it's all kind of a little bit nebulous there. But it's a like you say, it's not a horrible movie. It's not a good movie. It's just the C or D list of the Universal monster movies.
Right.
You see flashes of interesting things in there, especially if you're a fan of these movies. Then it's definitely worth watching. If you're not really, if you're even a little bit skeptical or a little bit like so by the headliner Universal monster movies, I wouldn't bother with this one. But
right, this is definitely a little bit campier than the others.
Yes.
And when you get to think, like I don't drink wine and stuff like that's played up in this, and then they have interesting things where like she comes and visits, although it's interesting, so his coffin's kept in a swamp, and and like you mentioned, we see him turn to mist. He turns into mist to exit the coffin in this one, which is kind of interesting. You don't see anyone like clamber out of the coffin. You don't see the wriggling hand, trying to open up the coffin. Yeah, they just turn to mist and come out. Yeah,
and they also turns to mist to like just get away too, or to go back and forth. And in fact, I think in this one, Laszlo like presents the cross to Alucard. I think when he turns to mist and flees the scene that way. So
yeah. So it's interesting. It's not like I say it's what it is. But
in all these movies, do any of the vampires have fangs? I'm trying to remember if Lon Chaney Jr. does in this one, but I don't think any of them have. You actually see like fangs.
No, I don't. You definitely don't in the others. I don't think Lon Chaney Jr. does either. I don't think any of these we see fangs. Yeah. I don't know where we first see. Yeah, I mean not counting
Nosferatu. Yeah, Nosferatu has like the rat-like teeth.
Yeah, but he always has those, right? So,
right. Yeah.
So I guess the question is, what's the first movie where the fangs come pronounced? And I don't know. I don't, and I have not. We'll revisit, but we're going to see Dracula again. And in fact, we'll see him again when we do our combo movies like House of Dracula and House of Frankenstein. House of Frankenstein comes first.
Yeah.
And so we will. And in fact, well, who play? Oh, John Carradine plays Dracula.
Yep, John Carradine.
Yeah. So I don't know. I don't know when we first see fangs. So I guess we'll find out.
But, and we'll see Bela Lugosi again too. So, and in our next installment, the Frankenstein franchise will be introduced to perhaps Universal's biggest star, the uncanny Boris Karloff the Uncanny, one of my favorite all-time actors. And that's the plan. We'll be going through we did Dracula, we'll be doing Frankenstein, then the Mummy. I think that came before Invisible Man, right?
Yeah, whatever order they came in.
Yeah. And Invisible Man and the Wolf Man and the Creature from the Black Lagoon. And then we'll do. This is the plan. This is the grand plan. This is from the guy that's taken more than a year to do the BX deep dive. So who knows how long this will take to do. But
these are easier to do. Now, whether people want to listen to two guys talk for 2 hours about these movies or not, that's another question. About 2 hours. It's almost 4 o'clock.
Good Lord. Yeah. Good Lord. All right. Yeah. Well, if anyone's still listening, bless you for doing so. You must be as big as crazy Universal monster fan as the two of us are. But we'll be back hopefully before the end of the year, but maybe in the new year with Frankenstein. I'm guessing the earliest we'll be doing these things is like on a monthly schedule or so, because we have to watch the movies and stuff, and we'll probably try and have a better, more rigid outline, or we'll break these things up, because some of the franchises have, this is the fewest movies,
right?
This and the Creature from the Black Lagoon. I think all the other ones have at least 3 sequels, excluding the mashups where there's more than one of the classic monsters taking part. But yeah, anyway, thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed it. And we'll be back again with our treatment of Frankenstein. So until then, thanks so much for joining me, Jason. I appreciate it. And the rest of you, don't go down in a heap. 2 hours.
Yeah, 2
Good
hours.
Lord.
Van Helsing. Now that you have learned what you have learned, it would be well for you to return to your own country.
I prefer to remain and protect those whom you would destroy.
You are too late. My blood now flows through her veins. She will live through the centuries to come, as I have lived.
Should you escape us, Dracula, we know how to save Miss Mina's soul, if not her life.
If she dies by day, but I shall see that she dies by night.
And I will have Carfax Abbey torn down stone by stone, excavated a mile around. I will find your earth box and drive that stake through your heart.
Come here. Come here.
Okay, folks, I hope you enjoyed that replaying of that classic episode where Rob and I discussed Dracula. If you're interested in hearing the other shows in the series, you can find them on Rob's show and my show, but I'll also be replaying them here when I have open weeks. Now, as we get panels put together and have panel discussions, those will take precedence, but as we have weeks that we don't have content, we're going to plug in these talks between Rob and I about Universal Monsters. But next week, like I say, it's a bonus episode. The plan for the bonus episodes this season are the reading of the Endless Quest Book 19, Conan the Undaunted, with listeners calling in to give us their feedback on what path Conan should choose. And then any other listener feedback will also be fielded on those bonus episodes. I'll talk to everyone next week. Until then, be excellent to each other.
A Nerd Central broadcast, Cerebral podcast. Let's savor all the flavors from the Sinal Hemstraw. The All-Stars and Pods past, Cerebral podcast. You're counting down your last as you admire them all. Something's blinding teeth, or soon escaping your brain. Then, what I mean is this machine's a freak, and from what I understand, that's an evil. Don't look now, this Super is coming, and all that's left is the crying and the running. You can bring it, you can hide, I'll be above in any order. Just another ring of real tossers running for the border. Just a snap, like a one, can I stutter? We are MP. Always bread and butter, all you can eat on a baby, and his customers never say it. Wasn't savoring the flavor of the memories it created.